Welcome back to Palestine Bookshelf and our film club discussion of Jenin, which is a 2002 documentary done by Mohammed Bakri. This was done in the aftermath of Operation Defensive Shield, which happened April 3 through 17, approximately 2002. This is during the Second Intifada, and as usual, the Israelis make up a reason to go in some place and they destroy it. What's interesting is the images that we see, the quotes that we hear, the stories we're told are the exact same stories that we know to this day. In 2025, as this video is being recorded, the stories that we see and hear from 2002 are the exact same ones. I wrote them down. We have children wandering around rubble of what used to be their homes. We have buildings being dynamited spitefully, despite nobody being in them. We have tents where there once were homes. Palestinians shocked at the silence of the world. Hospitals being shelled and bombed. Execution of unarmed people. Israelis urinating in cooking pans and other household items. Accounts of looting and robbing by the IDF. Running over corpses with tanks or heavy vehicles. A sniper shooting a pregnant woman in the foot. And even when this execution is brought up, the idea is, oh, well, the Israelis don't execute, unarmed civilians. That's not possible. It's the same story. And when the UN tried to have a commission go in to investigate, the Israelis blocked it. If you have nothing to hide, why block an investigation in which you can show that you are the good guys and evil Islamic Jihad, Hamas, whomever you want to accuse, they're the bad guys? Let an international UN investigation prove that. But if you have something to hide, or if you don't have confidence in the narrative of truth, then you stop a UN commission from investigating. Now, there's frustration on the side of the Palestinians as well. This is probably these wounds are pretty fresh. And at one point, at least one of the Palestinians says, just stop filming. And he's saying this to a fellow Palestinian because he doesn't have any confidence that any of what will be filmed will matter or will change things. And how can we say that he's wrong? This was filmed in 2002. It's 2025. Nothing has changed. In fact, Israel has only continued its murder, its genocide, its apartheid. The star of this documentary, much as we saw for Mohammed al-Kurd in My Neighborhood, that 2012 documentary about the settlers in Jerusalem, is Najwa Jalamine. She's unnamed, but I went and looked her up because she couldn't have been more than 12 years old at the time of this. So 2002, do the math. If she was 12 in 2002, how old would she be now? There was someone of that name who is married and living in Dubai. Could that be her? I don't know. I don't know if that's a very common Arabic name. But she is a total firebrand in this documentary, and we keep seeing shots of her and her talking articulate would put most Western 12-year-old girls who who would keep saying like, uh-huh, etc. This girl just speaks in full paragraphs. She is entirely convinced of the situation of her people and what is necessary to continue resistance. I just wrote down some of her quotes. We will rebuild everything. We will keep having children. I am not afraid of these cowards. This is a 12-year-old girl. I was so impressed by her. Echoing some of those sentiments, I would say someone in his 40s at the time of this documentary. He says, what was destroyed can be rebuilt. We can have children to rebuild the human loss. The widowers, can remarry. But he asks, how can we remove this hatred from our hearts? That's what concerns him. We can rebuild our homes. We can have more children. We can remarry. He says there are solutions here for everything. He says, but how can we remove this hatred from our hearts? Implying that that's not what he wants. Nobody wants that. And he'd said, I was perfectly happy to live next to a Jew. And that is a sentiment that is expressed to this day. The question is how to do that when the crimes continue to pile up. How can you operate? Now, obviously, I am part of a religion in which the remedy is forgiveness that is asked of you, um, even in such a gross way. And I'm not saying it's easy. And I'm not saying that the Palestinians can't avail themselves of that either. All that can do is potentially lighten the burden. But hatred primarily punishes the hater. The person who is carrying that hatred, it can eat you up inside. And so, for his own benefit, I hope that man who said that, can we remove this hatred from our hearts? I hope that he can find a way to lighten that load. I completely understand what a heavy burden that must be to carry, and that it's a natural reaction for someone who has acted this way towards you. We have another scene in which a man is going through his bulldozed house, and he's sort of showing us around. This was our living room. This is the room where my father died. I think just died in his bed, not necessarily during the siege. Here's where there was an olive tree. There was a lemon tree. You can see it's all just rubble now. And there's an old gentleman who starts the documentary by asking, what did this home ever do to anybody? Because it's a very natural question. You see this rubble, this home must have been offensive. It must have been anti-Semitic in some way. And that is its punishment. It has to be reduced. That's a perfectly reasonable question. What did this home ever do? But provide shelter and memories of love for Palestinians who we know are animals who don't deserve that. That's why a building has to be destroyed. Palestinians cannot be allowed to have shelter. A particularly moving scene. This is early in the documentary as well. And it's not long. Everybody, if you did not have a chance to watch it before coming onto the stream today, it's only an hour, but it's one of the more powerful 1 hour documentaries you can see about the West Bank. So I really encourage you to see it. It's free online. The creator, the director of this film has had to go through a lot of grief by the Israelis as a result of having put out this film, having dared to put out this film. He's gotten into a lot of trouble with the Israelis for it. He has Israeli citizenship because his family stayed after 48. So he's one of those 2 million Palestinians that have Israeli citizenship. So there are limits to what they can do to him, but they can still make his life pretty bad. Sorry, what I was saying was there's a scene early on in which an old man emotionally tells us about what happened to him. He's holding up his hand. So he came out and an IDF soldier shot him in the hand, and he said, I'm unarmed. I'm just trying to flee. And then he shot him in the foot. And the guy is just crying. I think just from frustration more than anything, frustration and disbelief. I can't believe that as an unarmed person, I would just be shot like this. And yet he knows that this has happened to his people for decades. And I think the real pain was that it had happened to him finally as well. And he was less focused on the pain, I think, of the actual injury than that this could be done to him. And that he thought he might die as well at that moment. He thought, well, they shot me in the hand, they shot me in the foot, they might as well shoot me in the head. He didn't know what would happen to him. So it was a very moving scene early on. Different quotes from different Palestinians. They say that Western countries are more concerned when an animal dies than when an Arab dies. True in 2002, true in 2025. Arab countries are only allies on paper. True in 2002, true in 2025. We will remain until the end. True in 2002, true in 2025. There is a fatalism to Palestinian resistance that admits of dying rather than giving up. Sumud, we will stay on the land, no matter what the cost, no matter what the price. And once you have killed all of us, then you can come. But as long as there is one of us left, we will not allow you to take our land. Thus far and no further. There's a doctor that's asked about his dying son. He wasn't able to save him. because he was in a zone where anyone who would go out to him could be shot. So the doctor starts crying as he talks about being unable to save his own son. And one of the reflections, interestingly enough, was one of the survivors of 48 reflecting. He was probably 8 or 9 years old at the time of the Nakba, but he said that was hard. He said, but what made this harder, and he's talking about Jenin in 2002, was that um, this was the work of a lifetime. So he had raised children, he had built a house, he had, had this family, and all of that, he says, although this, he said, this work of a lifetime was gone in an hour. So it's an important reflection of what was different for that 1948 generation who were children during that time. They didn't lose what was built up. They watched their parents lose it. So this generation who had built something up and had it taken in 2002 experienced some of that trauma that their parents had, because their parents, in a sense, had that same thing happened, maybe not demolished while they stood outside, but many of them had that experience of having their homes demolished and being expelled from their homes, or having their children killed, or having family members killed. There's an interview with a couple young children. I would say they are maybe 9, 10, 11, 12 at the time of the documentary. The interview asked, if you had $1 million, what would you do? And they said, we would donate to the camp, we would rebuild. And that's their entire focus. We will take care of our community, that we are one people, that we're together. And this resilience that I see over and over, the resilience that I've seen in person when I've been in Palestine, when I've spoken to Palestinians, it's always there. And characteristically, I want to close my opening monologue with this. It ends on this smiling, happy note. This man pretends he's calling Bush on a phone, but he holds up a plastic shoe to his ear. But you can see they're laughing, they're smiling. This is something that I think is not just a Palestinian trait. I've seen it among Arabs in general. I've seen the Lebanese in the same way, that no matter what has happened to them, they still find a way to be joyful and to be happy. It's something extremely admirable. And that's how this documentary ends. In a sense, not in an up note that things will be different, but that we will persevere as a people. So you can do whatever you want to us. You will not take us from us, in a sense. And that's astonishing, beautiful, wonderful in many ways. And one more reason why I think you should watch this documentary if you haven't already. So Ping says, killing Gaza by the gray zone is quite traumatizing to watch. Yes, I know, Ping. We did a film club of it, and I actually got emotional on the camera, um, unexpectedly. But it is difficult to watch, but it's well worth watching. If you want to watch it or watch my film club discussion of it, it's on the channel. But I agree, it's recommended. You also commented righteous anger is natural. No, yeah, there's a difference, Ping, though, between righteous anger and holding hatred. Those are two different things. Anger is something that can come for a moment, or even a long moment, or even for a day or 2 days. But hatred is something you hold on to indefinitely, and it's a poison. So hatred is never anything that, as at least in the Christian religion, it's not anything that's ever spoken about as a virtue. You should have hatred for peoples. There's hatred for sin, there's hatred for evil, but those are abstract things. And having hatred for a person is something that can eat away at you. So it's not anything that can help you in the long term. Could there be potentially, let's say, a hatred for your enemy that helps you on the battlefield? I think certainly. I would be lying if I didn't think that was the reality for many of the soldiers of Hezbollah or Hamas when they're fighting with the IDF, that there is a chance of vengeance. But even in martial arts or in boxing, hatred cannot help you win an engagement. It blinds you, it takes away your focus and your vision, it overcomes rationality. So hatred is not only harmful for your soul, it's not helpful as a battle strategy. So there has to be something that sits above hatred, that controls it, that pushes it to the side and sublimates it into something else. And that's what I think we have this vision from the Palestinians that are interviewed in this documentary. I think we have a vision that supersedes hate, that sits above it, that talks about being one people and having a vision for our future and reclaiming our land and saying, there's a gentleman who says, I don't want this for my children. I grew up in the occupation. The occupation has to end. In his mind, there is an end game. We're not going to be occupied forever. At some point, we're going to take back our land. That is our goal. Very reasonable goal. One underwritten by international law. And that may be fulfilled one day when the world decides to stand up to Israel. Until that time, this is the status quo, as I say, in 2002. That is present tense for 2025. Any other questions in the chat? Any other comments from people who had a chance to watch the documentary, or questions about the documentary if you didn't have a chance to read it? Michelle Norris, Wikipedia's entry for Zionist political violence is a helpful summary for details about the Jewish Zionist groups in Palestine before 1948 and in mandated Israel after 1948. Michelle, well, I haven't read it, so I'm just reading out Michelle's chat. I don't use the term mandated Israel. That is a Zionist term. It's sort of rewriting. There's no such thing as mandated Israel. It's just something that is asserted by the Zionists because it makes sense for them. If the Balfour Declaration helped to create mandatory Palestine, then there's mandatory Israel. Jewish Zionist terror groups. Michelle, you may be newer to the channel, but on this channel, I don't make a big distinction between parsing Jewish terrorism or Zionist terrorism because they were one and the same thing very early on, and that's how the Jewish state was founded, was on Jewish terrorism. Menachem Begin claims this in his autobiography, semi-autobiography, The Revolt. And when he was interviewed, he said, "What is it like to be the father of terrorism in the Middle East?" And his answer was, "The Middle East, the whole world." So divorcing Zionist terrorism from Jewish terrorism, I think you could, there's sort of redundancy. You can say they're the same thing. These are Jewish Zionist terrorist groups. And that's something that you can't even say. I think that's the question is, can you say there's such a thing as Jewish terror, even though the father of Jewish terrorism said it in his own book? Because you're not allowed to say it. You can't imply that they've ever engaged in terrorism, but that's exactly what happened. What happened to the King David Hotel? Who did that? Who did that bombing? Who invented truck bombing? Jewish terrorist organizations. So if you want to know the history of how this all happened, you have to go back and look at what really happened. And that's something I've done a review for this on the Stephen Heiner channel. I'll be doing a review of this, an express, you could say, review. But this is one of the most important books that I've read for Palestine Bookshelf and reviewed, One Palestine Complete by Tom Segev, because it gives you this whole this 1880 to 1948 window, and it's long enough to do so, that gives you that sense of what was happening in all these different places, the Nebi Musa riots in 1920, Hebron in 1929. What were all these different touch points and how did we get here? There were ways that it could have gone differently if the British had acted differently, if the US had acted differently, if the Palestinians had acted differently. There were actually many possibilities of what could have happened. But most of the time, we don't know. When I say we, when we're talking with our interlocutors who we're talking with, they don't know enough to really have a fruitful engagement. And I think that's something that you have to decide whenever you're chatting with someone is, one, is this person actually interested in the truth? And if you're talking with a Zionist, the answer is generally no. And if they are interested in the truth, how deep are they willing to go with you on it? How much are they willing to read or watch or listen? Because you can't casually, the number of times people said, okay, can you give me a 5-minute rundown, 10-minute rundown? And I said, I could give you a 100-minute rundown. Of course, I do try to give them a very brief rundown, but when someone says that, it just shows they're really not that interested. If they think that this can be reduced to a 2, 3, 4, 5 minute summary, you might say, "Hey, you know what? It's probably doesn't make that much sense to talk about it. If you think this is something that can just be explained in a few minutes, it probably won't be helpful." But then you like me, I disregard my own advice sometimes and still try to do something. But be mindful of that. Don't just charge headlong into an engagement, especially when people are trying to troll you. Zionists do this all the time, that this sort of fake outrage. I've learned how to deal with it over the last 2 years. But if you're just getting involved into activism on behalf of the Palestinians, you really have to watch that and measure your own reactions and measure what you're capable of and measure what you know and say, well, you know what, I don't know about that. I need to inform myself more about that before I can talk about it. Michelle notes, we know about Stern Gang, Irgun, Leahy. Yeah, those are the big three, Michelle. Those are the most important ones. Israel's national security minister has been arrested for terrorism. Zaid, is this something that has just happened recently? I've been somewhat engaged today in other things, so I have not followed the news. Intriguing speech by Truman in 1947 saying the Zionists want all the land on a silver platter, but this must be done gradually. That sounds right, Michelle. I did a review about Truman recently, an article that was written about him and how he recognized Israel de facto in 48. But he really came to be beholden to them because of domestic politics in the US. So there was a Zionist who sponsored a whistle stop tour. For those who don't know, in the United States, at the time, our train systems were quite developed in America. And so a whistle stop tour would be a train that would make stops in different cities, and the presidential candidate would just come to the caboose and he would give a speech on the caboose to people who were gathered around the rail tracks. And he couldn't afford this at the time. He didn't have a lot of backing. He had a rising tide against him and the Republican candidate. And this Zionist stepped up to say, I'll fund your whistle stop campaign. However, ... So Truman had a lot of Zionists around him pushing and pulling. And Truman was not a particularly thoughtful man. FDR had managed to keep the brakes on this issue, and Truman took the brakes off. So it's important for you to point that out. Thank you, Michelle. And I think if people want to know more about the U.S. recognition, you have to dig into Truman. Another book, and this is more U.S. history than Palestinian Zionist history, but if you look at a book called The Accidental President, I think it just looks at the 4, 5, 6 months after Truman becomes president, all the consequential things that happened, deciding to drop bombs on civilians in Japan, the recognition of Israel, the dividing up of Europe with the Soviets, effectively losing the war to the Soviets. Everyone thinks, the Allies won World War II. I don't see how you can win a war when Europe is divided. I don't see that as really winning anything. But if people want to take credit, they can do whatever they want. Zaid Itamar Ben Gvir. Well, Zaid Itamar. I mean, the man is a terrorist. I don't think anyone there's some Israelis who would tell you that Ben Gvir is a terrorist, but alas, he is a government minister. So it just shows you the level of tolerance for terrorism among the Israelis is high enough that they will tolerate them in their own government. But thank you for noting that. All right. Are there any other questions about this documentary, about Operation Defensive Shield, about different aspects of it? As I say, if you did not have a chance to watch it before today's film club, please take an hour and watch it. It's well worth your time. I think you'll get a better and deeper appreciation for what's happening, not just today, but in the West Bank, that's still happening now. And will continue to build out your appreciation for the reality of the situation. Michelle, Ben Gvir was criminally convicted for terrorist offenses 8 times in the past. I didn't know it was so many, Michelle, but I am unsurprised. All right, everybody. Thank you for stopping by. Thank you for those who participated in the comments during the stream. If you have thoughts to share, you're watching this after the stream, please feel free to comment. We can continue the conversation. You can share books, ideas, films in the comments then. I'm always happy to learn from you. And that's part of how we continue to select films, not only from suggestions you have, but the research I've done myself. So thanks for stopping by, and hope to see you on the next stream.